Hello, and welcome to the Adulting Well podcast. I am your co-host, Joshua, and I am joined, of course, as always, by Kevin McCracken,
How
the
you doing?
McCrackster.
Happy New Year, everybody. So today on the show, we have Jesse Townley. Jesse, also known as Jesse Luscious, DJ, band member, singer for Blatz, Grups, The Criminals, The Frisk, The Pathogens, Scene Killer. I don't know if I'm missing any there, but you've also worked at Alternative Tentacles, Fat Records. You've been on the Berkeley Rent Board, which is something I want to talk about a bit. Currently, and for a very long time, a DJ on KALX. Many more things. You've been on the Green Party Steering Committee, coordinator at Gilman, booker at Gilman, volunteer at Gilman. I mean, the list goes on and on. So, Jesse, welcome to the Adulting Well podcast, and thank you so much for making the time to do it. I know you're in Nottingham, and
no problem. As they say, the list is thousands long.
It's thousands long, and also one of my great defenders in my many troll threads on Facebook.
Oh no, really? Do you get in there with Kevin?
Jesse actually comes in with the very logical, this is the facts, dudes. Just relax. Sometimes he has to throw out the F word, the fascist word, but not as often as I do. So Jesse, welcome, and I'm gonna just kick it over to Joshua to have open our show today. So go ahead and throw your first question at him.
My first question is a comment that one of the funniest things I ever heard was I went and saw Rancid way a long time ago, and you were in the crowd and you kept asking them why Op Ivy broke up. Like, you kept shouting, why did Op Ivy break up? It was one of the funniest fucking things I've ever heard. And the other thing is, what kind of kid were you? Like, where'd you grow up? Did you have a lot of friends? Were you by yourself? Just what kind of kid?
I grew up in Philadelphia. I was born in New Jersey, moved to Philly when I was 3, and then moved away when I was 18.
Oh, you were there a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up there. I mean, it was no moving around for me. I guess I would say that I was definitely a nerd. I read a lot. All of my family are involved with words. My grandmother was an English teacher. My mom was a librarian. My dad is a writer and English professor at different times. I mean, he's been a writer and poet since day one. He was in the middle somewhere. He was a professor at a university called Drexel University in Philadelphia. And then he also did an exchange program with a university in Chile, in Concepcion. And so in 1978, he went down there for a year. And then my mom and I went down and visited him in 1978. I was 8, so you can do the math.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I ever saw real submachine guns, because it was in the midst of the Augusto Pinochet dictatorship, which, as we know, the CIA, Henry Kissinger, encouraged, because it was just way too much that a South American country could actually elect somebody to the left of, FDR.
What does fascism look like to an 8-year-old?
Lots of machine guns. And my last name, Townley, is the same name as the American agent who allegedly killed Salvador Allende, who was the democratically elected socialist. So when I first met a bunch of kids in Concepcion, we were all outside playing. I had my little Spanish-English dictionary. I told you I was a geek. And we were trying to talk to each other. They were like, my dad had warned me about this. Mm-hmm. They were like, "What's your name?" And I said, "Jesse Townley." And they all kind of shrunk away. It was like, like a cartoon or something. And I was like, no, not that one. And they were like, "Oh, okay." And they all came back. It was kind of like the Group W bench kind of thing. But yeah. So,
well, I'm just saying, most people in America, most Americans don't get exposed to something like that. Ever.
No,
true.
So when we talk about fascism, when we talk about it, we're talking about things we read about, and we're talking about things that we don't want to happen, that we've heard happen, but not that we've seen happen,
I mean, look, we were like a, a white American professor family.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were in no danger of anything.
Sure.
So I don't want to overstate anything at all. But at the same
But
time, like,
even seeing machine guns in the streets is
it
like,
was crazy, you know. But then again, look, I mean, I went to when I went to Paris, that's the first time I saw machine guns in a subway.
mm,
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, it's just a matter of militarization of law enforcement, and you know, and like what they're facing. Like, you know, in that case, they were facing, you know, threats of who knows, threatening to bomb who knows what. You know, um, I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying there's different uses for some machine guns in subways. You
sure,
know,
sure,
sometimes
yeah,
it's
yeah.
to enforce a fascist state. Sometimes it's not to, or to. Yeah, this is a tangent.
Well, no,
There's so
it's
many
okay.
different
I mean,
ways.
I think it actually plays into even today, though, when you see some of these guys at protests, like these Trump protests, saying with shirts that say Pinochet was right. You know, I mean, and we're talking about a guy that was throwing his political adversaries out of helicopters and, you know, killing all artists that had any lefty leanings at all. And, you know, when
Mhm.
I tell people, like, it's so ironic that they don't get the fact that fascists and authoritarians always go after artists first when they're saying, "Oh, Hollywood shouldn't have a voice," or, you know, musicians should shut up and play, you know, and all this other stuff. And it's like, well, but people like Pinochet, Hitler, etc., always went after artists because they were the closest connection to the people. Because
And
when
they
people,
were
go ahead.
and they were, if I could, they were also almost always on the left or on the bleeding edge of anything that I would say is opposed to fascism. So, you know, yeah, in the Weimar Republic, you had, you know, the insanity of, you know, Babylon Berlin, you know, and you had just things that weren't seen in at least Western civilization until the 60s in the US
Right.
in terms of sexuality and hedonism and all kinds of fun stuff. But I mean, and, you know, and that really offended the social conservatives. And so they made a pact with Hitler's, you know, Nazi party because they saw what Mussolini was doing over in Italy, because obviously Mussolini predated Hitler in terms of being in power. But it's the same thing here. Like when I see those assholes, the alt right, whatever, PR is PR, I guess. Public relations, not punk rock. Um, you know, the newest neo Nazis or fellow travelers of neo Nazis, whatever you want to call them, wearing Pinochet was right T-shirts or like helicopter emblems. It's like you are forwarding an incredibly inhumane practice, a way of killing people that is horrific. And if you had any ounce of self-reflection or any ounce of self-awareness or an ability to empathize with others, you would never, ever put that on your chest or on your baseball cap or whatever the fuck, your flak jacket, like you're going to fucking fight the fucking military. Ugh. Anyway, but because my dad had that, it's funny this that came up because I almost never talk about the Chilean thing. Because of that, I was really aware whenever Chile came into the news, and so and my family, like my mom, she went to Antioch College in Ohio, and part of their thing is they have a co-op program where you go to school for 6 months to a year, and then you go to somewhere outside of the college and do 6 months to a year of work. And so she did her, and actually now this is definitely a trend. So she did her year away in Spain in the
Interesting.
60s in Granada. So there you go, another fascist Spanish-speaking country. So I was brought up to be really aware of Spaniards, people speaking Spanish who are fascists.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So
not funny, but it is kind of weird now that I think about it.
I mean, so how you know, you had, it sounds like you had a pretty interesting childhood, and obviously your parents were if they were into words and they were traveling to countries to do these exchange programs, they were also probably incredibly connected to world politics. How did this kind of play into you getting into punk rock? And when did that happen for you?
Sure. I came into punk rock from politics. My whole family, my grandma, she was a wave in World War II, and she tried her best. She was an FDR Democrat, mm-hmm. and she was incredibly progressive for her times. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And so she instilled in me the fear of not God, because we were always lapsed. If I ever said something that she disagreed with or kind of raised an eyebrow, mm-hmm. I would have to be sure to be able to defend it. Otherwise, I would be just verbally, in pieces on the floor.
Right.
So I learned really quickly to be able to stand up for myself, and more importantly, to have something behind me to stand to support me.
Right.
And so that's why I kind of, between that and reading a lot, like gravitating towards a lot of facts and a lot of.
That's a good lesson. I think a lot of people like me find themselves in a place where they go,
Empowering.
No, and the other person goes, why? And I'm like, I don't know, but I know it's wrong. I have to go to the internet and look it up.
Right. But no, but I was always forced to back what I had to say, mm-hmm. and then punk rock, like, you have a lot of opinions and you're young. I was young. Mm-hmm. I got into it because I liked hard rock, and then all the weirdos and freaks hung out together in my school. So there was like the hardcore punks, like 2 of them, mm-hmm. maybe 3, depending on how you count. Same with, and this is in Philadelphia, Center City. So like, this is not like Iowa,
Right.
But like I was in the chess club, I was in the fencing club. We had like all the weirdos and the gay guys who hadn't come out yet because it was the 80s, yep. You name it. Like, and our school was actually really, it didn't have a lot of that like jock versus punk stuff, like mm-hmm. in terms of violence, but there were definitely layers, and there was definitely a hierarchy. I mean, it's teenagers, right?
Sure.
High school. It's going to happen.
Yeah, adults don't have hierarchies.
Right, never. But so like I would be hanging out with whomever, like the weirdos, and like one time in study hall, like a weirdo was singing "Big Lizard in My Backyard," or I think he was actually singing "Bitchin' Camaro," mm-hmm. and I was like, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's a song by the Dead Milkmen," and I'm like, "Who are they?" And he's like, "I'll give you a tape," and so he gave me a tape. Yeah, it was beautiful. It was like one side was Dead Milkman, Big Lizard in My Backyard, and the other side was Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, oh, here we are. This makes all the sense in the world. Because like I was already into like metal, and especially hard rock, and like Joan Jett and AC/DC. So I was already primed. And I was like, oh, this is much further. And then like when I first heard Black Flag, I wasn't quite sure that what Greg Ginn was doing was music, because of the distortion.
Yeah.
Like it was just really weird. And so, across that with being a teenager and then suddenly being able to go to shows, and like suddenly like the guy on the stage or the woman on the stage is right next to you for the next band. Mm-hmm. It was like not like going to see AC/DC or Joan Jett.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, and then politically, a place called Wooden Shoe Books in Philadelphia was my home away from home before I moved out and started squatting in Philadelphia. So politically, I was raised by classic Northeast liberals, who went to candlelight vigils in the 60s. And then by the 80s, it was clear to me and to my friends and peers, well, this isn't enough. Like you have greed is good. You have all this insane stuff. You have Reagan. You have nuclear missiles that are about to kill us at any moment. Clearly, holding hands and singing "Kumbaya" didn't work. Didn't work for Gandhi. He's dead, assassinated. Didn't work for MLK. He's dead, assassinated. Et cetera, et cetera. So it was really ripe for me to be like, especially as a teen, to jump right in. With both feet, and I did.
Yeah, makes sense.
How did you make the jump to Berkeley in the East Bay?
I moved from Philly I went to Antioch College. I followed in my mom's footsteps for 3 months, my 3-month collegiate career. And
familiar.
I realized I had a really great class about fascism.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. So that gave me a little more background. I already had a lot of reading about anarchism in my toolkit, mental toolkit, but that really helped me kind of fill out some of the underpinnings of fascism historically. And then I went and visited. I went back to Philly, went back to squatting. Then I went to visit my friends in Chicago, and then my beautiful, beautiful, wonderful Mustang broke down in Chicago, and it was winter. Well, okay, it was spring, so it was like March, so it was snowy.
Oof.
Yeah. And then I finally got everything fixed about a month later, so I was able to come back to Philly, and then went to New Haven to live with friends and to manage my friend's band in April. So by May, I was up in New Haven, Connecticut, armpit of the world. And then that's where I first met David Hayes, because I was booking this band's tour from Connecticut to Chicago and back. And then David Hayes, I was going to have them meet up with Plaid Retina somewhere in Illinois. Yeah, it was just weird.
Underrated lookout band right there.
Yeah, great
incredibly band. Underrated lookout band.
Yeah.
And a great live band.
Yeah. And that band never went on tour. They still owe me $200, but I think it's okay. And then I decided to move out to California to join an art magazine. And at the time in the 80s, there was kind of like I don't know, the best way to put it is like a radical activist circuit, where, like, for instance, in, I think in 88, there was the presidential conventions, and each one of them were a stop. And then there was the Toronto Anarchist Gathering. And there was a thing called Peace Fest in Chicago that I actually went out and I met my friends there. They came up, I want to say the Democratic Convention was the week before Peace Fest in Chicago. So we met. I didn't want to go to that, so I met them in Chicago. That's the first place I saw Scooching Weasel, outside at this big thing called Peace Fest in like along the lake somewhere.
Would people go like to festival to festival? I don't call them festivals, but from really,
they would go from like, and it was like this whole thing. It was like the anarchists and the weirdos and the freaks and the political people on the left, or the people who thought themselves outside of left and right.
Yeah.
And then so next year, 89, there was the anarchist gathering in San Francisco. So I was like, well, I'll go out there, and that'll give me a chance to move my stuff across the states, and I'll join an art magazine, and it'll be great. And instead, I went to the anarchist gathering. Went to Gilman for my first show. There was the anarchist gathering show at the MDC, Condemnation, Political Asylum, Yeasty Girls, and I didn't leave for a couple of decades. Basically, I never joined an art magazine, but I did end up doing a lot of bands and a lot of radio, and working at a lot of music places, like you said, Alternative Tentacles. I worked at Lookout, Fat Records, and now I work at Package Sounds, where we actually manufacture records and CDs. Awesome. And I've been really, really lucky, and been able to kind of make things fit somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you hit the ground running, I mean, yeah, it's I like that. Do you think there's still these activist gatherings where people are going, and like every year they see the same people, and there's these relationships based around this like deadhead but activist tour?
Yeah, I think there is. Not this year, for obvious reasons.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's always different fests, and like, for different people, like sometimes like things like Warped Tour would probably fill the bill. Maybe that would be part of a circuit.
Right.
I don't know, because like that wouldn't have been part of my circuit, but it was definitely political. But I think now it's more like there's skill shares, and you have music festivals where they have skill share workshops and this and that, and then at night they have all these crazy bands play.
Yeah.
So I think which I think is like much more fun. Like, I mean, like you go to like a presidential convention and you kind of stand around and then you hope not to get beat up.
Yeah. Well, and that I think it also played into like when the WTO was in Seattle and the Republican National Convention in New York City, like a lot of the same people were there because I was in New York and a bunch of people were, it was like kind of the same crew of people, and I know, Ben Sari and some of the guys that moved to Santa Rosa. So, and I feel like back in the time you're talking about, a lot of the organizations work together, like Anti-Racist Action, the animal rights groups. And then like we got all of our civil disobedience training from Earth First, so it felt like everybody was sort of like, if you were in that group, like you would go to the Peace and Justice Center and get some kind of like skills training there in Santa Rosa. Someone would come out and teach you exactly how to react if you were arrested at a protest. Someone would come out and teach you what to do if you were tear gassed at a protest, which the cops say they don't do, but obviously they do. So it was, I felt like all of the groups were like less sort of like divided, and, in many ways, like in some ways people still are connected, but I feel like a lot of times there's like, I go on like these vegan boards now and it's just like, it's bananas. You know what I mean? Like there's people on there like putting up like light worker crap about Trump. You know what I mean? I'm just like, white vegans have a race problem, and people get super upset with me. And I'm like, but it's true. Like having been a vegan for 30 years, I can tell you right now, white vegans have a major race issue, and, whether they like it or not. And I feel like a lot of that was trained out of us in many ways, like back then, because there were so many, like we had an indigenous group come out and do trainings on, how to be an ally to indigenous groups. Like it was like, there was like a lot of like interaction, and people just felt, not that it was the good old days, but, it just felt like there was just, because there was no internet, you had to do this stuff in person and you had to connect on a level that was a much more human level. And I think this year has really screwed that up, in a lot of ways. Like, it's harder to do over Zoom. It's harder to do over, this kind of stuff. Right. But I'm curious. So you got out here did you say 89?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you go forward. Could I just say that I think you mentioned the Native American. I think the whole the issue of water and the oil pipelines in the Midwest and across the middle of Canada, that too, like that's a huge issue. And I think water and the connections between the global North and the global South are. I think that's where a lot of this is still coming to a head. And I think there's a lot of places where people see familiar faces politically in these circles. So I don't think it's like, I think it's just different faces in different places.
Yeah,
that's great. That's really cool.
It's nice to have that connection, and so 89 Gilman was really kind of ramping up at that point. Like there was a lot going on. Obviously a ton of the records came out in 88, but the early Lookout stuff, 88, 89 was like, that was major time there. I mean, kind of in the middle of like the uproar about, Operation Ivy and, like how there were some amazing bands. I mean, and obviously I still think there's amazing bands coming out of Gilman, and, I've
definitely are. Yeah.
I was lucky enough to play a show with a couple of really young bands, like right before this pandemic hit in February. And I was just blown away. I'm like, these guys are killer. They're like amazing musicians. They're like talking about things that are relevant. And, it's just like Gilman seems to continue to breed that kind of like awareness and talent. And so what was it like to be there? I mean, obviously I've got my stories, which are a little different because I was in the North Bay, but I was there, at a lot of shows, but, I went to very few volunteer meetings because it was just such a drive at that time in my Volkswagen Bug. But talk a little bit about what it was like to be there in like 89 and how you kind of got involved in volunteering, coordinating, because you played a lot of roles. You wore a lot of hats there. So,
well, I ended up finding a place to live literally down the street at 6th and Gilman, and Gilman is at 8th and Gilman. Yeah. So a block and a half west. So I could be there a lot. But I mean, I think part of it is just being a teenager and being exposed. Like, I had only been into punk rock since '86, so this was year 3 for me, and of punk rock. So it was still super new, and I was still really just omnivorous, like whatever I could find out more and more and more. And like, especially where for me, politics was always really, really important for art, to have relevance. Like there's always, a lot of art has no obvious political content and can be super awesome. Okay. Let me make that very, very clear. But at the same time, like when it was able to involve all our art, especially with humor, and especially in a way that was accessible and not boring and PC. And let me say, when I say PC, I mean it in the old leftist way, where leftists would make fun of other leftists who were dogmatic and overly serious. And we call them politically correct. And it wasn't, the mainstream hadn't discovered the term yet.
Right. You're talking to the singer for Engage, so I don't need.
I wasn't going to say anything, but Brian Engage is infamously.
Yes, and in Siren, and I played in Siren with him, so switched to drums. Helped him do research for some of his articles. Oh, boy,
but that's his shtick.
That is his shtick.
Yeah.
It's funny though, was he always made fun of identity politics back then, even then, and now he's even more like on it, but I still talk to Brian a lot. So
awesome. Well, tell me.
I will. But,
tell him we're joshing him, with love.
Yeah,
of course.
He's come up a few times. Yeah. But it's interesting that one of your bandmates actually called Engage the Van Halen of hardcore at one point. So, but we'll get into that when we talk about your bands.
But anyway, so what I'm basically trying to say is like, it was a crazy time, just like it could have been anywhere.
Yeah.
But me being 19, 20 with like all these other 19 and 20 and 23-year-olds and 15-year-olds and just everybody is in this mad buzzing hive of activity and villainy. It was great. So I think anywhere would have been insane. But I think the fact is, like I've said this a lot of times to a lot of people, Gilman did not have and the East Bay did not have any kind of stranglehold on talent or awesome bands or anything. It just, we were lucky in that we were across the bay from maximum rock and roll and in a place where a lot of people visited. So a lot of people saw what was going on. And if we didn't have a maximum rock and roll or maximum rock and roll radio, or all the other kind of like built-in music outlets in the Bay Area that were being watched on a national level, nobody would have even noticed what was happening in Berkeley at the corner of 8th and Gilman. Nobody, except for other punks, I grew up in Philadelphia. I can name you half a dozen bands from Philly that are incredible and criminally underappreciated. Dead Milkmen are actually one of them. They're the most appreciated. But like bands like Ruin, McRad, Morphines, just a ton of bands. And it really is still stupid. That's reaching deep. And that continues to today. Like, every single city and a lot of the smaller towns have like awesome bands that nobody will ever hear of. But okay. Anyway, so yeah, it was crazy. We were a community, and the Gilman community still exists completely. I'm part of the elder statesperson Gilman community. Well, physically, I can't go there because I'm 5,000 miles away. But even when I lived down the street in Berkeley until 2019, I was there. Yeah, maybe once a month.
Well, and you helped get Green Day back on that stage, didn't you? To some degree or another.
I thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think we had some back and forth about it online when it went down. I was surprised.
It turned out fantastically.
Yeah,
like people like Kamala and I were both very nervous about it becoming a known thing,
right?
And then having 8,000 people just cram the streets around 8th and Gilman trying to get in, and it would just be madhouse. There would be cops. It would be ridiculous. It would just be really
Bad
really,
for Gilman
really,
too.
really awful. Yeah. I mean, at this point, that's the only reason. Like, most people listening to this grew up with Green Day on a major, so it's not that big of a deal, like it was to my generation and to your generation.
It was a huge deal.
That still, sticks in my craw. I don't think that signing to a major is a good idea, and I don't like where the money goes for some of it siphoned off for people who make the tools that fascists use.
Yep.
I'll go further. Green Day signing ruined the Santa Rosa music scene.
I don't know about that.
Okay. There were no glossy photos before that moment. Like, punk bands did not. Everything changed.
I can't begrudge musicians wanting to make a living for what they do. I mean, I just can't, even though I did a lot of writing and we did a lot of like protesting it especially when I was in Siren and Engage. And, I do have a question about that time at Gilman. Who in the hell booked Engage with the Dwarves? Who was the mastermind behind that one? I would love to figure. Yeah, I think it was.
It sounds like something I would do.
Yeah, totally. It was like the craziest combination of, it was me and them in the side room getting paid. And you can probably imagine what that conversation was like after we had on stage very vocally said that we were going to give our money to Berkeley Women Against Rape during our set. And so the Dwarves spent most of their set calling us PC. So
that's the proper use of PC, by the way.
The end. I think it was like a weird matinee show too. That was the other weird part about it. It was like a 3:00 start time or something on a Sunday.
So it's a Sunday show, right?
Yeah. But it was like somebody actually sent me that flyer not that long ago, and I had forgotten about it. I was like, I thought to myself, I bet Jesse did that. I bet that was his doing. That seems like the right time frame.
Was 15 on that? I'm
probably.
I remember Scary Mike did a flyer for that that I have in my mind.
Yep. I think probably because we played a ton of shows with 15 at that time. That was kind of our, because everyone would get all the long songs out of the way, in one show, and that would be that. But it was interesting to be part of the scene up in Sonoma County during all that too, because we were taking cues a little bit. And also we got the bands that were touring that wanted to play a second show in Northern California. So we would get, crazy bands like Universal Order of Armageddon, and we would get Avail, and even like Rancid came up and played some shows, and it was like one of those things that was like so awesome for our scene, because these were bands that people didn't get a chance to see very often, and that would keep them from having to drive down to Gilman, which was already going to be a sold out show. And, see them in a larger venue or a very smaller venue. Like we had Avail the first time they were out at Cafe This, which I think held maybe like 30 people on a good day. And there was literally people like up in the rafters of the, because we had Among the Thugs come up and play.
And Rancid played that place across the street.
Yeah, sweet.
Super small. Yeah.
So, I mean, we got the benefit of, and I was booking a lot of shows then. So I would be like, let's look at the Gilman calendar for next month, because I guarantee that one of those bands is going to have a day off before or after they play Gilman Street.
Yeah.
But,
and yet the Phoenix Theater.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Is still
place.
there. So.
Yeah. Totally. Mm-hmm. It's still there, and it's hopefully going to flourish when we get back to live music. So let's talk a little bit about Blatz. I mentioned Robert briefly. Robert,
he called you the Van Halen of punk rock.
He did, yeah, and I think he did it in his zine at one point. But he said it right to my face after we played at Gilman one night, and I was like, that's a compliment, right? And he's like, yeah, I meant it as a compliment, of course. Like,
yes,
I mean, I'm basically comparing your guitar player to one of the greats of all time. Like, yeah, it's a compliment, and but we got a lot of shut up and plays when we played down at Gilman. So talk a little bit, because again, like another, East Bay based band that just was an unbelievable. I mean, like your live performances are the stuff of legend. I mean, people still talk about it, and I had the good fortune of seeing Blatz play a number of times, and it was never ever boring. It was always like, holy shit. Did that just happen? Like it was always a really amazing performance. And I mean, you guys were on your A game. You brought it and left it every single time you played. And so talk a little bit about how that happened, and kind of because it was an interesting cast of characters as well.
Yeah, we were definitely a bundle of chaos in a band. But I appreciate that. Like, honestly, like what you just said, it was never boring. That's exactly what my goal was. Like, like the whole like no press is bad press.
Yeah.
I kind of extend that to being in a band. Like if you're in a band and people leave not remembering you, you failed. I don't care what your songwriting is. I don't care what the cover of your record looks like. I don't care who produced your record. If you suck live or you're not memorable live, more importantly, what's the point? You know, like you would see bands play and just kind of stand there. And especially with like a lot of the emo bands, like a lot of the indie rock bands, especially, like they were like, oh, we just have to write passable songs and have the right connections and the cool artist to do our record cover or whatever. But we don't actually have to put any thought into live performance, which is where, to me, one of the main sources of energy and inspiration and art happens in terms of music is live. You know, it seemed really insane to me that these bands would just get up there and just be like, just strum away and like, yeah, and like you guys, like I've seen certainly thousands of shows. I've seen thousands of bands play at this point in my life. So especially for singers, like I'm very judgy is a strong term, but I think I'll own that. I think I'll take judgy.
Yep.
I'm with you on this 100%.
I am 100%.
100% with you. When it looks like, in fact, it drives my friends crazy when they're trying to enjoy music and I'm just making comments like, did they not know they were performing today? Or like, what's like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even stuff with like, where people like, okay, I'm not going to get into it because then all my friends are going to think that I'm judging them completely, which I'm usually not because of my friends. And I'm like, you have a pass. It's okay. Yeah. But people I don't know, like if the way that singers move and the way they, even stuff like how they interact with, like if they have water on the stage, you know, like in the middle of the song, are they going to turn away from
yeah.
It's like, okay, you've given me a lot of clues right there. A, that you're not really into the music right now, which is crazy to me because your band's in the middle of a song. Right. But B, it means that you're not about to burst into anything. You're just going to stand there like a lump in the middle of a song. Those are the kinds of thoughts that go through my head just automatically. So I apologize ahead of time to whomever I'm judging. They'll probably never hear about it because like I don't really talk about it that much.
Yeah,
but it does bug me, and people close to me know that I do it. But I'm always, and like, look, I'm not a vocal, a strong vocalist. All right, I can't carry a tune. All right, let me make that very clear. So I'm not talking about the skill involved. I'm not talking about if somebody has, can hit a note. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about pure stagecraft and how they carry themselves on stage. And that's something that I watch a lot for obvious reasons, because that's one of the only things I have in my back pocket.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really good example would be, let's take a band like Fugazi. That music, if they were on stage just strumming it out, no one would have gotten that in. It would have been like, wow, their albums are great. They're great musicians. They would have been a musicians band for sure. But they like basically ripped the roof off of every venue they ever played. Yeah. And that was part of their allure. I think the same thing, like really, if you look at Blatz, like, are people going to buy the record without the package that comes with it? I don't know. I mean, but the live show, I mean, and especially at that like era of Gilman Street, bands were fucking bringing it. I mean, it was like I felt like it was almost like friendly competition between singers to be the most outrageous on some shows. Not that people were being fake about it either, because it's part of just being the lead singer of a band. And, I actually much preferred the drums, even though I think Engage was an incredibly energetic live band. Like we didn't stand around and those songs were fucking hard, man. But,
because of Murray's pictures though, even in Santa Rosa, if you hadn't seen Blatz, you still pictured Blatz. Yeah, exactly. You still kind of knew, or your friend told you stories about it, or so it was still there.
Yep. It totally was. So I just like, that's the kind of stuff I love too. And I agree with you. I'm totally judgy about lead singers, especially ones that aren't carrying a guitar. You know what I mean? Like I can a little bit, I'm a little more like, okay, they're playing guitar and singing. That's really hard. Like I can't do that. So I have to have a little bit of like, you know, niceness about it. But singers that are not, I mean, it's like standing there, and I went and saw Off a couple of years ago. Keith Morris still brings it every show. Like I've actually seen them a few times, but the last time I was like, it was right after Trump got elected. And, I just was like, I was wondering what he was going to say. And he was like, we're here to have a really good time. And hopefully we can forget for the next 45 minutes about what the fuck is going on in the world, So because everyone's going to be too depressed if not.
Right.
And then they just killed it. They were just unbelievable. And what is he like 60 something?
I mean, around the same time, I saw DOA and Dictators at Slim's, like exact same time period. And both Joey Shithead and Handsome Dick Manitoba, for all of his issues, brought it. And they were very outspoken politically. And I was like, half of me was a little like, uh-oh. But it worked out. I was like, whew.
Yep. Dave from MDC still brings it. Jello still brings it. I mean, I can talk all I want about how much Jello talks between songs, but he when they're playing, he's there, he's killing it, So, I think you're right. And, it's always funner to me. Like I'll listen to bands on record and I'm like, I don't know if I love that. But then I see them live. I'm like, they're fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And it's usually because they have that charisma.
Between seeing a video of a band, like I do MMH radio now.
Oh, right.
mmhradio.co.uk.
Yeah.
Every Monday night. And I try very, very hard to only preview bands audio and not see the videos. Right. Because I don't, because of that exact thing, like the visual adds to it. And it's like, radio is audio only. So that's what I got to judge it on in terms of how it's going to fit into the show. Like I can say this band is incredible. And, with certain bands, I'll do that anyway. I'll kind of preview hey, this is Arnocore. This is why they are one of the greatest bands on the planet, just like their album title says, for instance, because of their live show. But they have the chops to back it up musically, I think. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, but about Blatz, we were very into humor. We were not very serious. Yep. We had a very deep, strong undercurrent of political knowledge and political thought that was often glossed over for the fuck shit up kind of stuff.
Totally.
And hustler and stuff like that. But at the same time, we were all very political still. Because, I came from, I talked about my background, but also everybody else came from either longtime political backgrounds or they grew up in punk rock, which was inherently political.
Yeah, totally.
And still is.
Yeah. What were some of your favorite shows from back then? I mean, especially ones that you played. Are there any ones that really stick out?
Well, I love we played People's Park,
mm-hmm.
which for people from outside the Bay Area is, it used to be a parking lot. And then in the 60s, the hippies got pissed off at the University of California at Berkeley, which basically runs that town, and ripped up the asphalt and made it a park. Yeah. The university was really pissed off about it, and there were riots about it. And finally, basically, the people said, fuck you, this is our park, we're going to keep it. That's a really short version.
Yeah.
And it kept on flaring up over the next 40 years. It's still flaring up every once in a while.
It does. Yeah.
Every so often, the university says they want to build dorms on it or whatever because, it's their land and they can do whatever they want. And the community says, fuck you, it's the community's land now. Tough. You're literally the largest landowner in the East Bay.
Mm-hmm.
You'd probably find a place to put some effing dorms.
Yeah. Or a parking lot.
Yeah. So we played, I'm pretty sure it's the only time I ever played People's Park. I mean, and People's Park was a place where homeless people and hippies hung out. And a lot of the homeless were punks. A lot weren't. It was a pretty varied mix of people. Some wingnuts, some sane, some down on their luck, some people just kind of living a lifestyle. It was a really mixed bag. So Screeching Weasel was in town to play Gilman, and probably it was probably because at the time there was like the Bay Area circuit. There was like Epicenter. There was Petaluma at the Phoenix Theater. There was maybe the Cupertino Library, I think. Santa Cruz, there was a Vets Hall.
Yep.
So there was all these different places that a band could play like 5 nights to totally different people. And so bands like Screeching Weasel, Chumbawamba, Citizen Fish, 2000 DS, memorably because they left a trail of really pissed off people in their wake. They were like a squatter band from over here in England, and don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Not worth. But Nausea.
I think I have one of their 7 inches.
Yeah, Born Against, like all these bands would do the circuit thing. So we were able to find, like for some reason, we found out that, like, it must have been a July 4th thing. It was July 4th, so there was a music festival at People's Park.
Nice.
And this was right before or right after the volleyball riots, because the university wanted to put a volleyball court. And so the riot's about that, whether or not they could do that. And it was a people's land versus, yuppie volleyball players. It was a long time ago. Okay. Anyway, so it was middle of the day, which was weird for everybody in both bands. But we were like, okay, we'll set it up. So Blatz set it up, and we brought all the equipment. And all the riot cops were on Haste Street, which is on the north side of the park. And we parked Marshall's old car, this big green beast, on Dwight, which is on the south side. North side, south side. Yeah, on the south side of the park. And so we assigned everybody a piece of equipment. If the cops charged, to grab the equipment and run south to Marshall's car and put it in the car. That's how unsure we were that anything would happen. Meanwhile, Screeching Weasel's there, and they're like, okay, well, we're using your equipment. We have our guitars. Like, we'll see what happens. And so the cops, they were there in Riker, like all along Hay Street. And they were like, you guys can't do this. It's legal assembly, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, fine. So we start playing, because what are you going to do? You're there with your equipment, and it's turned on.
Your hands were tied. Come on.
Basically, yeah, we were forced. So we play. They don't do anything.
Right.
So we played our full set of 25 minutes or whatever. Then Screeching Weasel got up. They played however long they played, and all the bands played. It was fine.
Nice. Yeah,
that's amazing.
But it was a really weird show, because we were all like, until the first half song was done, we're like, do we have to run? It's just very,
that's an awesome show memory, though. And those are the kinds of things, like, you can't really, it's like those memories are so precious, really, it's really like you're there for 2 reasons. So as like, kind of like fuck shit up, like party as Blatz was, the fact of the matter is there you are essentially protesting the next phase of the development of the UC, in the middle of Berkeley. And for history's sake, I think it's important to point out too, that when the parking lot was put up, Joni Mitchell wrote her song, Big Yellow Taxi, about the UC taking over Berkeley, with these parking lots and, putting trees in tree museums. And, and I know, because the reason I even am able to make that connection is because Jeff Ott used to talk about it incessantly, because there were times where he was saying staying in People's Park and how the people took back after the Joni Mitchell song, they took that park back, and it's true. They ripped that parking lot right out of there.
Hey, Kev, I just want to make you aware of time in case you want to get to any.
I do want to get to some
more.
Stuff. Yes. So, we talked a lot about music. You also, obviously, we've talked about your political, learnings young, but you continue your political sort of, evolution, and you've been incredibly involved over the years in the U.S. When you were here with the Green Party. I can imagine you're involved in, something equally as progressive there, as well as you were, you sat on the rent board in Berkeley, which I find incredibly amazing and interesting, and so it's not, a lot of people talk about politics, and especially online, and I always say, like, politics are local, get involved, it's really easy, and it's like kind of a hard sort of you transition, they get, I get some people pissed at me, like, I am doing stuff, you know what I mean? And it's like, but what are you really doing? Like, you can contribute $5 to a local campaign, and it's a major difference. Like, it makes a huge difference. I live in a unincorporated area with 11,000 people total population. Mm-hmm. So if I walked door to door just on my street and handed out flyers, it would make a huge difference in any election. So, just kind of looking at that and seeing the things that you've done over the years. And, I know we don't know each other well, but, like you DJ'd at a show that one of my other hardcore bands played at, out in the Mission, and, also we should mention Scott, because he's been going through cancer treatment, and I just want to give him a shout out. And he booked that show.
Yes.
Yep. But you've been incredibly politically active. I'm going the long way around this. So just talk a little bit about how that sort of, because it seems like it's something that really fulfills you as well. And I'd just like to kind of hear how you tie that into your daily life. Cause clearly it's in the top, 3 things in your sort of your life. I mean,
look, I was like, you heard me talk about growing up in a political environment. And for me, if I can sleep at night, I know that I'm probably doing the right things, whether it's work or just daily life or art or politics or whatever. If I can sleep, okay, it's good. And I say that because it is, like you say, like it's a constant thing. It's a constant evaluation of what's going on and like what I'm doing, mm-hmm. and am I really doing enough, and blah, blah, blah. At my age, I've just got my first pair of Doc Martens. Okay, I've always wanted a pair of
amazing
oxblood Doc Martens. I'm not a skinhead, but I just think they look awesome. And my wonderful better half got them for me, and she got the vegan kind. Nice. So they're not even leather, which is great. I've been vegetarian since 1988, and I try very hard to avoid leather in almost all things. Like I have a leather belt. Yeah. It's usually all I have in terms of outerwear, clothing of any type is not non-leather. So I could see myself backsliding, getting oxblood docs that were leather, but thankfully I didn't have to. And I'm really, really happy. I was thinking about that last night. I was like, oh, I'm so glad. Whew, dodged that bullet. But for me, like Gilman actually, again, played a major role in reconnecting local politics with music and art and activism. Because before it was all Chile and Reagan and nuclear weapons and whatever, very far away, mm-hmm. For the most part. I mean, gentrification was the only thing that we saw really clearly in Philadelphia, in New York City, in places across the country where people were getting pushed out of the centers of cities. And it was just really bad. And it was really clear that it was just for capital's sake. And that was it. It was not for the good of the community. Mm-hmm. But besides that, for the most part, it was a lot of other things were really at a distance. Gilman went through a whole series of political kerfluffles. And we had this guy named John Hart who showed up to Gilman to a meeting because he had heard about us, because he was a longtime activist at People's Park. You see, right. It's all like, it's like a small town with all mm-hmm. these connections. Go figure, because that's exactly what it is. It's a small city, but basically a town. So he had heard about us from People's Park. He came down to Gilman, saw how it was run. He was really stoked that it was a collective, and the difference was that he had direct experience with politics, local politics. Like Tim Yohannan had a lot of friends in Berkeley politics, which is part of the reason why Gilman existed, right? Frankly, because he had friends on the zoning board. And so when we would run into problems with the beat officer, the beat police on our beat, John taught us how to go to the area coordinator and say, hey, or area commander, whatever the title is, and say, hey, officer so-and-so is being really weird. We're trying to work with them because we don't want you guys there.
Right.
And the cops are like, we don't want to be here. we have crimes and donuts to eat, like we have real crimes and real donuts in on our ledger of things to do today. And, hassling some kids who are drinking in some bushes is really low on our list. Understandable.
Yeah.
And there is a donut shop right there.
There is. Yes, there is. Happy Donuts. And so, so we learned that, and we learned eventually when the area commander was being a jerk to go to the city council member in that area. And I was a resident of the area, so I got to talk to her a lot. Right. And, I was actually a voter for her. So anyway, we had a thing with the Pyramid Brewery across the street. They were going to move in. They were like, oh, we don't have to worry about Gilman Street. They're nothing. We'll just move in. And we were like, oh my God, a huge yuppie brewery, to use the parlance of the time. And we fought and we forced them to come to the table. Thankfully, they're based in Seattle and they weren't hard asses and they weren't idiots. So it wasn't that difficult. But once they realized that, oh, we have to deal with this weird place across the street called 924 Gilman, they came to the table and we figured it out. We were able to come together and figure out something that we could give to the city council and the zoning board and say, this is what we want. These are the conditions that we want for them to open across the street from us, because we were here first. Right. And we are important community resource and on down the line. And there was this place called Dicon Electronics across the street. Had been there for a couple decades probably. They started expanding at the end of the 90s, when, the internet was going to make everybody super rich. Some people super rich, but they were like, they didn't go to us. They didn't talk to us at all. They went to the economic development part of the city and said, we need to shut this place down on the corner because they're frightening their patrons are frightening our workers. And we were like, you knock on the door, send them emails, whatever, call them. No response. So we were like, oh no, that's not going to go that way. So we took all the lessons that we learned at Pyramid and we applied them to Dicon, and we killed them with kindness. We were like, we want to negotiate with you. We want to mediate with you. Here's the city council person. Here's we met with the police and the economic development people, and Dicon wouldn't show up. Eventually they did show up because they had to, because the city manager was like, Dicon, I can't do anything for you if you're not going to participate. This is a city. Right. They're your neighbors. Yeah. And we were just like twisting the knife in there, and we ended up having basically when they finally came to the table, it was really a non-event because they were like, oh, okay. Huh. Totally. Sure. Sounds great. Right. And then within, I want to say 2 years, but it might have been as long as 4 years, they moved to Richmond. Okay. They cleared out, and because they got a better deal from the city of Richmond, and they moved there. And after buying up all these properties, and so it was like, okay, so city of Berkeley, your economic development people, if we hadn't had our crap together, would have destroyed an internationally known cultural institution for some jackasses who are making circuit boards who don't even give a flying hoot about your city. Right. You're that close to doing that. And so, that's a war story, I guess. And so out of that, my, the people I was working with, and I was a part of the Green Party at that point. They were like, I was like, I want to run for city council because I am sick of these older people making all these decisions. Like, there need to be young people involved with this. And I was a middle-aged young person. I was in my 30s. Right. But still, I was still much younger than anybody on the city council. Let me tell you, all baby boomers. That has since changed, by the way, which is great. And they're like, okay, we'll put you on a commission, and then we'll go from there. And then I ran for city council in 2004 after getting a couple of things under my belt in terms of political subjects and political. I was part of the Disaster and Fire Safety Commission, so earthquake preparedness was very important. And I had also been running a nonprofit called Easy Does It that serves people who are disabled, who are living independently. So I had kind of the disabled community under my belt in terms of people I had worked with and had contacts with and had worked on disaster preparedness for disabled people. So I had a couple of different things that I could be kind of an expert person for. Right. I used those as stepping off points for my city council run, which was totally unsuccessful. I knocked on thousands of doors, talked to hundreds of people, Came in third out of 3, but I mean, I still got like 1,200 votes out of probably 6,000 cast.
Not just that, there's representation happening because you've been in bands, because of other things. People like me hear, oh, did you hear Jesse Blatz ran for office and won or did this or that? You just hear these rumors and it opens doors to,
Totally.
oh, I'm a punk rock kid. I can go do something like that, right? So whether you won or lost, it's very powerful, and there's no way to know like the full impact.
But also, I mean, 4 years later, I was asked to run for Rent Board, and I did. I was chosen to be part of the pro-tenant slate, the progressive pro-tenant slate in Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
We won.
That's amazing.
Honestly, the pro-tenant slate, almost always all 4 or 5 members of the slate win. I came in 5th out of 5 of our slate. But that was good because that meant I only filled a 2-year slot.
Right.
And the term limits are 2 full terms of 4 years each. So that meant I could run for re-election twice, which I did and won both times. And actually, the second and third time I ran, I didn't come in 5th at all. Yeah. I came in 1st or 2nd or 3rd. Yeah. Like 1 year came in 1st, another year came in. It doesn't really matter because we're all the same team, so whatever. But it was really nice to actually go up a little bit.
I'm sure it did. I'm sure it felt great.
Yeah.
If anything, to know you're getting better at campaigning.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And name recognition,
which I think is even more important than networking. But I mean, you mentioned, Kevin, just giving $5 is important, or just flying a street in an unincorporated county, unincorporated part of a county, is important. Politicians, except maybe in huge places like San Francisco or Philadelphia or New York City, or maybe there too, I don't really know, are always short of help and people being in person helping out.
Yep.
So if you can walk up and say, hey, I want to volunteer for your office, or I want to, can I give out flyers for you or whatever, you start building those relationships and you start to meet people.
Yeah. And
it's not even like a, hey, how you doing? It's more like, hey, you're somebody who's interested in what I'm interested in. And you, this other person over here, you care about this issue. And, hey, I live over here with this other person and we have this neighborhood thing going on. And then it builds on itself until you become known to a larger and larger group of people. And then you're a viable candidate, no matter what, within reason.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always, the last thing I'll say very quickly is about this is there's always a difference between being an activist or a gadfly and then being a politician, as in being an elected. And they're two very different roles.
Yeah.
I think Trump is a perfect example of an activist, small a activist. He's okay. Sorry. He's such a problematic figure in so many different ways. In terms of using him as an argument or as an example, wipe that. Yeah. Please disregard that sentence. That last thought. Activists are great for pointing fingers and yelling at the city council or the school board or the rent board from during public comment, and for getting, for marching and holding up signs and doing a lot of the really, really necessary work to move politics forward. Okay. Whether they're waving AK-47s like some of these right-wing activists, or whether they're, blocking, access to nuclear weapon sites, like the Code Pink people, it's all groundwork, work on the ground out in the community. When you're running for election, a lot of times you're still an activist, or you're at least using activist language. But once you get into office, okay, suddenly it changes. And a lot of people who have never been there don't understand the gravity of that change. Yeah. It's not like 180 degrees, but there's definitely a degree shift in your outlook and how you approach things. Because not only are you suddenly on the other side and suddenly you're the man. I got that a lot when I ran. They were like, you want to be the man? I'm like, look at me. Do you think I'll ever be the man?
Yeah.
Whatever. but you're also dealing with your colleagues who you have to work with. Politics, at least in this sense, when it's not a dictatorship, is a thing of compromise and degrees of moving together forward, and you don't get what you want. And the enemy of the pretty damn good is the perfect. And the activist always sees things in terms of perfectness. It's either perfect or it's garbage.
Yeah.
It's very binary. And being an elected is you can't do that and last. You just can't. I mean, and that's why, like watching as a Green, watching the Democratic primaries with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and all these people from the left, and watching my fellow friends, my friends and punks and whoever who are supporting these different people be really pissed off that Bernie would vote for, I don't know, aid for Israel or something. I'm like,
right.
That's called politics.
Yeah.
That's literally how it works. And sometimes the sausage is really disgusting to watch being made, but the sausage still has to be made. And that's how you get things like a $600 payout instead of $2,000 or $1,200 for pandemic relief.
Move the needle little by little. That's how we do it.
And it sucks. I mean, take it from somebody who, came up in the anarchist bookstore scene. Like it is really, really incredibly. I had such problems when I first got on the rent board because I would talk about justice.
Oh yeah,
from the dais, and the chair of the rent board at the time, a wonderful woman named Lisa Stevens, longtime anarchist and Green, and she would say, Jesse, you can't say justice from the dais because our enemies, the bad landlords, Berkeley Property Owners Association, are going to take that as part of their lawsuits against us.
Right.
And I was just like, wait, what? Like I had no understanding of that level of opposition where you can talk about justice and the silliness of this situation where you can talk about something that you're doing isn't just, even though it's the law. But somehow that's going to come back and bite you. And so there's more injustice because you're talking about getting justice.
Right.
You're following the law. It's just like this.
Yeah.
So I understand why it's difficult for people to follow along sometimes, but like at one point, towards the end of my time on the Berkeley Rent Board, I was seen as a more conservative member
of your group.
Of the Berkeley Rent Board. And I'm just like, are you guys blind? Like, what are you talking about?
That's interesting.
The problem is, like, I know the rules and regulations that we are bound by.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right. You're just playing. You're just doing the
playing
job.
The game. Yeah.
So unfortunately, one more thing, I'm sorry. And you also have staff members, like the people who actually run the city.
Oh, right.
If you're a jerk, it doesn't matter if you're the most politically awesome person. If you're a jerk to them, you can find your way a lot more difficult.
Yeah.
Forward. Like it's just
it's a whole nother thing. So we're over an hour at this point.
Sorry.
No way, man. That was exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, I'm glad we got that.
Hey, I'm a politician. I talk.
Yeah. No, but it's good for people to understand. And there's a lot of people that listen that are, sort of that have very strong political views, but maybe don't fully understand how it all works. And, so I appreciate it. I mean, I'm myself pretty involved in local politics, but it's like, how much does that get you in terms of insider knowledge? So, it's really good stuff. And, and the connection between punk and politics has just always been so obvious to me. And some people, they're more of the fuck shit up kind of punks, which is totally fine. Like, do it. Fuck it up.
I wrote the song.
Yeah,
Thanks.
exactly. So we generally just throw in a couple of things at the end of every podcast, primarily that we give our Patreon money, if we get any, to Hospitality House SF, which is an awesome nonprofit organization that I support greatly. And
also, Kev, we were doing that till the first of the year, but we're gonna extend that a little bit, just while everything's so fucking crazy right now.
Yeah, everything's still a little nuts. I just want to say too, we had a guest on a couple months ago, Maggie Freeling, who does Unjust and Unsolved, and she covers cases that people are clearly there's evidence saying that they should not be imprisoned. One of her cases got his conviction got overturned in North Carolina, which is amazing because North Carolina can be a little bit of a red state, and their criminal justice system is brutal. So congratulations to Ronnie Long on getting out after 44 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. And so we love to brag about our guests and about the amazing work they're doing. So I just want to give Maggie a shout out. She played her episode on her Patreon for all her subscribers. So we want to reciprocate with a thank you. And Jesse, we could probably have you on for another 3 hours.
For sure. We should have you on again.
Yeah. So we're making a list of people that we want to bring back to kind of finish, unfinished business with. So if you're open to it, we would love to have you back on, sure. In the next couple months and just kind of extend this conversation. Cause there's a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk about that I didn't get to, in terms of your experience and especially around the record label stuff. So,
there's a whole bunch of craziness.
Exactly. So thanks for making the time on it's 7:00 in England there in the UK and,
AM or PM?
PM.
Okay. I was just wondering if you were eating pizza at 7 a.m. I was just going to be very impressed.
Yeah, my last name's not Ramon, unfortunately.
Well, thanks for coming on, Jesse, and maybe, hopefully we can get you on again. And thanks for listening, everybody.